Hello and welcome to this Monday's COVID update. It is April the 13th, 2020. It's a Monday update to talk about the great news coming out over the last week, the horrible reactions from Governor Edwards as the data on the virus starts to paint a better picture than predicted, and my opinions on freedom. The good. The CDC is finally admitting that there will be far less deaths and hospitalizations than they and the World Health Organization predicted. This is no shock to anyone that has been following the ridiculousness of our media coverage over the past 10 years. It was clear at the beginning of this pandemic that they were presenting worst-case predictions as hard facts. Both New York and Louisiana have had to admit that hospitalization rates are much lower than the numbers they used to incite fear and panic a few weeks ago, claiming that they would run out of beds and ventilators. April the 10th numbers in Louisiana are 2,054 hospitalized, 479 on ventilators, and there are currently 19,253 confirmed cases. This means that there is a 10.6% hospitalization rate. That is much, much better than the 20 to 25% originally predicted and only a 2.4% rate of the need of ventilators. In short, the lower hospitalization rate means that the curve can actually be higher without overrunning the healthcare system. The goal of all of this is to keep the curve at what the healthcare system can handle. Any lower and you prolong the peak, making this so much worse on the economy and the continued destruction of American lives. In New York, the stats are even better. The number of new coronavirus patients getting hospitalized only increased 3% since Tuesday, compared to the average 25% increases during the last few weeks. We are on the downside. Also, enough people are starting to get fed up with the government's draconian reaction to this crisis and social media's corona shaming that some media outlets are actually starting to report the news of the virus fairly instead of fear-mongering. This is very important to getting past the idea that this is some type of doomsday virus and that will make this the new normal. The only way this becomes the new normal is if we continue to let irrational fear rule the day and we accept this as a way of life. It does not have to be. Even the White House had to come off its 240,000 death estimate made just 2 weeks ago. That number was of course down from the 2 million it predicted 3 weeks ago. The number now of 60,000 deaths is much more manageable. The 60,000 figure is reflected in a new projection by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, or IHME, a research center at the University of Washington. The estimate predicts the United States death toll through early August. It also predicts that COVID-19 deaths will peak in this country on April 11th. For perspective, there are 350 billion people in the country, and our average monthly deaths are around 216,000. 60,000 spread over 6 months. While terrible, is not nation-ending. The bad. Even with the great news coming from the hard data that we are receiving as the virus runs its course, the governor of Louisiana continues to overreach and restrict the people of Louisiana. He acts as if he wants to continue this shutdown as long as possible instead of trying to start getting people back to work. Edwards said that in order to keep all schools closed for the remainder of the 2019-2020 school year is on the way, even though this virus is not as deadly as predicted. As the curve flattens and we learn that the effects are not as severe as thought, you would think that our leaders would be trying to get our lives back to normal. Instead, it appears the Louisiana governor is trying to make things worse. Conroe, Texas put up barricades to the entrances of the W.G. Jones State Forest Wednesday last week. This, I can only assume, is to keep people from taking hikes on the open trails in the park. I cannot imagine a larger overstep by an entity that serves very little purpose in restriction of the contagion, but it is an absolute abuse of power with many negative side effects. Instead of letting families go for walks in the woods where there's plenty of room to practice social distancing and an opportunity to get some fresh air, vitamin D, and exercise, they have decided to take away the public's right to use a state park. More and more businesses are closing as government overreach expands. It's been reported to me that a local custom motorcycle shop in Walker, Louisiana was forced to close and vacate the premises. This is just one example of a growing list of small businesses that the local and state governments seem to be trying to destroy, with no regard for the owners or their employees. As our governments continue to trample our rights and force us to live under draconian measures, our unemployment is skyrocketing. I'd like to give some numbers from just the state of Louisiana. From the beginning of March through April 4th, 277,000 people in Louisiana filed for unemployment. In the entire year of 2019, only 103,000 people filed. This was said by Governor Edwards, so he knows how disastrous these forced shutdowns are. In an average week, the state pays out $3.2 million in claims. In the past 3 weeks, the state has paid out $51.5 million. The cost is not worth the cure. In an unheard of and frankly disgusting use of a local police force, the city of Greenville, Mississippi handed out $500 tickets to people at a church service, the service over the radio, the people in their own cars, with the windows rolled up. They were having a parking lot service. They were sitting in their cars, and they actually had to roll their windows down so a police officer could write them a ticket. The officer should be fired, the chief should be immediately fired, and the mayor should be forced to resign. How dare they trample the First Amendment right to religion and the right to assemble? The members of that church were not doing anything wrong. They were taking measures to protect themselves. This is the government we are dealing with. This injustice has to stop. An opinion. The people that work with infectious diseases jumped on an opportunity for their 15 minutes and presented worst-case scenarios centered around the COVID-19 virus as fact. Our despicable and disgusting media outlets around the world jumped on the news and trumped it up as much as possible, knowing that fear, coupled with misleading headlines, would yield more clicks and link follows. Scientists and doctors that wanted to be heard either had to paint a picture of world-ending proportions or manipulate epidemiology to yield the outcome that would get the most attention. The ones that were presenting a level-headed approach to this new strain were ignored and not given airtime. If it bleeds, it leads. One of the best examples I've seen of this was an Instagram post by RT and news reports from CBS on New York having mass COVID-19 burials on Hart Island. That was the headline. Mass COVID burials. When in fact, New York has been using Hart Island as its public burial site for 150 years. According to the New York Times, it is unclear if those recently increased burials included those who have died from the coronavirus, or if they are people who already passed away before the pandemic and were being moved from morgues to create space for newly dead. Yes, they have daily burials there because in a city the size of New York, many people that die are unclaimed or the families lack funding for any other type of burial. This is not news. It's not new, and the media should be ashamed for presenting it as a means to incite fear. How dare they? A spokeswoman for Mayor Bill de Blasio said on Thursday that it was likely some coronavirus victims would be sent to Hart Island, but there was no record that any had been sent yet. To close, I want to remind everyone again that we are a free people. Our rights are given to us at birth, not from a government, but simply by being a human, and are clearly recorded in the Bill of Rights and made part of our country's Constitution. The government shutdown of private business is an affront to those rights. Writing tickets to churchgoers sitting in parked cars with their windows up is an affront to those rights. Destroying the lives of millions and millions of people with economic shutdowns, draconian measures, and enforcements of those measures with armed police officers is disgusting and something out of an 80s era propaganda movie against Soviet Russia. I can't believe that in the United States I have to show papers and explain to armed personnel why I'm crossing from Louisiana into Texas. We have handed all of our freedoms and our rights over in the name of safety from a place of fear. With freedom comes responsibility. responsibility to seek out truth, to rationalize, to not overreact, and to live with some amount of risk. We have shirked that responsibility. We have let the world know and our government know that we will not stand for ourselves, but will instead bow and take whatever the nanny state brings us. I hope and pray that we can regain some of the freedoms we have so willingly given away. I hope so for my kids and for yours. Thank you for listening.